Hosts, welcome back to the Singing Samurai. Today's video is in a hotel room. I'm about to go do an audition and I had some time to kill. So I thought, what better way to spend my time but to offer an Aikido rebuttal video to another Rokas video. Yes, that's right. This one is the first of two from the Steven Seagal, Jesse Enkamp videos. He says some really dumb stuff. Like really dumb stuff and some confusing things, and then offers terrible advice when it comes to dealing with the law and self-defense. So this is going to be fun. Check it out. Okay, so first of all, most Aikido schools don't teach it in such a direct way comment. In the last video, I talked about presuppositions. Presuppositions. These are assumptions that we make to base an argument off of that we just believe to be true. And he believes this to be true, but then... So this is one of the most confusing things.
Technique that comes from sword. Yep.
So that is a famous Steven Seagal move. Many people recognize it from him using it in his movies. And while there is a similar technique in Aikido known as Ruminage, most Aikido schools never teach it in such a direct way.
He says in most Aikido schools it's not like this, but then Steven Seagal, who is arguably one of the most famous people when it comes to Aikido and has taught tens of thousands of people Aikido and big events and things and demonstrating this technique, and it's in his movies. And so most of Aikido, like, really? You want to make the claim that most of Aikido doesn't approach it this way? No, Rokas' school apparently didn't approach it this way. In addition to that, that technique, it's not, the arm is not what makes the throat. It's a body check. It's the side of your body. If someone's leaning back and you run into them with the side of your body, they fall down. That's the technique. The break fall is just what it is because it's safer to take it that way, and it's compared to like another way to fall down, but that's all it is. You're just body checking somebody. That's the whole technique. The way that Steven Seagal is doing it is correct. The way that Rokas is doing it is different.
On the street, people normally will not punch you like this, they'll punch you like this.
So this I can really appreciate, because what Steven Seagal is referring to are Aikido strikes. In an Aikido, you usually punch either like this or like this. You very rarely punch the face. It's always a straight punch, usually toward the chest. And he's right, very rarely people will attack like that. Usually it's haymakers. And so the fact that he has developed certain movements to deal with the haymaker already shows that potentially his approach to Aikido is more realistic than the general approach to Aikido.
No. Okay, on my upcoming test, I have 2 punches to the face. On my last test, I had 3 punches to the face. We have side strikes. We have punches that go in this, like a haymaker or a hook or whatever you want to call it. We have punches to the face all the time. So when he says that this is not the way that it's done in Aikido, he is incorrect. Nyoshokai Aikido, we do it that way. So the other problem is when he says haymakers, like this is generally what happens in a street fight. Is that generally what happens in a street fight? Do people who go and get into street fights, all they do is just throw big, wide open punches? I mean, it could happen often. Sure. I've also seen street fights where it's a wrestling match, and I've seen street fights where weapons are used, and I've seen street fights where someone's kind of boxing a little bit and they're keeping their distance because maybe they know something. In reality, you don't know what someone's going to do in a street fight. You need to just be prepared for whatever, and probably the best course of action is to run away.
When your punch comes, it would be like this.
The whole lifting your arm up, controlling the center line as they call it in Aikido, I am somewhat skeptical about that. There's just a question of why would you do such a big movement, expose yourself, when there's so much easier and more efficient solution?
I have a great answer to that question, Rokas. You do it because it fits the situation that you're in. And if it doesn't fit the situation you're in, then you don't do it. I don't understand this guy. Like, why do you... It's weird. It's like he looks at techniques and says, well, you shouldn't do it because this could happen. Well, okay, so if that happens and this is a bad technique, then you do a different technique. To make the argument, this technique is bad because it's a big movement, or this technique is bad because you could do these other things that would maybe be better in the situation. The reason that that's bad is because that technique could be good in another situation. To just throw it out entirely and say, this is a really bad block because what about all these other things that can happen? Well, a jab is a really bad punch if you can't hit somebody in the face because they're too far away from you and they're using their legs to kick you. So, I wouldn't try and jab somebody if I couldn't close the distance, right? Does that mean a jab is bad?
From here, I have this. This is snap off.
And I can't move.
And then from here, I can also walk him around. Come down to here like this.
So all the techniques which Steven Seagal is doing on Jesse, to a degree they are legit techniques and they work in that specific scenario. When a sensei is demonstrating the moves on a non-resisting attacker. I've done them, they were done to me. They are very powerful under those conditions. As long as you're not resisting, you really are standing on your toes and you just can't move. But the real problem of applying these techniques in a real fight is how to get there. Those positions are really difficult to get to when a person is trying to grab you, strike you, tackle you. And usually in Aikido, dealing with those real attacks with resistance is not trained, and so there's no legit well-developed approach of getting into that position. But who knows, maybe Steven Seagal is going to show a better approach than what I've been used to seeing in Aikido.
Well, at least he says it's what he's been used to seeing in Aikido. Okay, so three things. You can't say that a technique is legitimate to a degree and then say it's not legitimate because you're not going to be able to pull it off in a street fight very often. What do you mean by legitimate? Like, what does that mean? The techniques function because they hurt, because you're putting bone on bone and you're causing a lot of pain and causes a lot of tension in someone's body. And when someone's really tense, it's really easy to control them, shift them, move them around. That's part of the reason that those techniques were developed. Also, initially they were developed to break the wrist or break the elbow or tear the shoulder or whatever. And so they were born from a culture that had trained in hand-to-hand combat and warfare for like thousands of years. So they're legitimate techniques. If you can't pull them off, and I know people say, oh, well, you're going to use that tired argument. If you can't pull them off, maybe you suck at them. But it's true, if you can't pull them off, maybe you suck at them. If I have a hard time punching somebody in the face in a street fight because I'm not very accurate with my punches, and I say, well, it's really hard to punch someone in the face because they keep moving their head, they keep bombing out of the way, they keep blocking, I'm having a really hard time hitting them. Does that mean that punches are bad? Or that I'm bad at punching? Or that the other guy is really good at ducking? Like, come on. These are really bad arguments.
For example, when you come to grab my leg, I'll hit you in the eyes like this on the way down. I'll hit you here. By the time you're down here, look what's exposed.
Yeah.
It's your brainstem.
So that is an interesting approach of using the gouging of the eyes or hitting some spots as a defense against takedowns. Now my question is, are you really going to get those eyes? If the person is really moving fast, are you really going to hit the spot? Because the eyes, they're only that big and they're a moving target. Are you really going to hit that trigger point, which apparently severs the brainstems?
Did you see that? Steven Seagal's hands were like this. If someone's coming at me and I want to put my hands on their face, I'm probably going to put my hands on their face. It's not like it's that mobile of a target that I can't put my hands on their face or their head and push them down. I don't think that that's a very hard thing to pull off. He did not do this. Steven Seagal did not do this. He did this. When he's saying he's getting their eyes, then you can't see. You hit somebody in the eyes, it hurts. It's a straw man argument. You're misrepresenting what he's saying.
This in sword is called ukenagashi. So when the sword comes down, you see the sword? This is a sword.
That logic about the sword, it's a popular one in Aikido to say that the movements come from using a sword. Now, whether it is true or whether it's practical, I cannot really say. But the concept of taking sword moves and translating them to hand-to-hand moves, it is part of the Aikido philosophy.
This is super confusing. So it's a popular philosophy in Aikido that sword movements, basically really the body position and sometimes the arm positioning of holding a sword, have been adapted to Aikido, and it comes from Aiki Jiu-Jitsu. Actually, it's the system of those techniques in Aiki Jiu-Jitsu were developed in such a way that you could train in them and still be training in a way that's complementary to the sword technique that you also had to train in. Because back in that day, you trained in this as a samurai, mostly to like defend the palace when you weren't allowed to carry swords in the palace. But then you were also a warrior outside of that. You were expected to go to war at the drop of a hat, or do a sword fight in the street with somebody. Like that happened all the time. And so you're not going to want to train in a hand-to-hand combat system that's going to run counter to the training that you need to do for sword fighting if your life is on the line when it comes to sword fighting, or someone coming into a palace with a sword and they're not supposed to and you're unarmed. So that's why that was developed in that way. And that's commonly understood historical fact. It's not a theory. It's not an idea that people like. That's true. That is a legitimate truth. That's how those techniques were developed and why they were developed in that way. But then to say he doesn't know if it's true, but then to say, oh, but it is true. It's like, make up your mind, dude.
When people say all fights end up on the ground, they are incorrect. 90% of the fights that I know end standing up with one person going horizontal. We don't want to dive down on the ground. And just as much time as those guys spend trying to dive for your legs and get you, we spend just as much time cutting your head off or knocking you out or ripping your eyes out or ripping your throat out or severing your brainstem when you go down there, because your head and your neck will be vulnerable.
So I know what Steven Seagal is referring to exactly. It's a famous phrase that apparently the Gracie's made famous, which is that 90% of the fights end up on the ground. So it's not all, but 90, it's close to all. Personally, I'm also skeptical of that phrase and that idea. I think many fights do end up on the ground, but to just expect, 90% of the fights go on the ground, so that's why I should train 90% only on the ground, I think that's not fair, because as one of the self-defense experts that I met, he said, well, almost 100% of the fights start up standing. Now, to not train any ground moves at all, I think that's a flaw. And that's a common flaw in Aikido, my former martial art, that you're not training on the ground because you're not going to go to the ground. But it's not your choice. The fight can still end up going to the ground. So I think as long as the idea is that you're not preparing the ground and you're also preparing for stand-up, I think that's fine. But to ignore the ground completely, I think that could be a flawed approach.
Okay, so we have ground techniques in Yoshokai Aikido. So at least in our school, we have ground techniques. So it's not true that we don't train on the ground in Aikido. In Rokas' school, maybe they didn't. Okay, but then let's take a look at that. Like, I think it's probably a good idea to understand what to do if you do get to the ground. But would you say that boxing is a bad school? Like, is learning how to box a bad way to learn how to defend yourself in a street fight? Because they never go to the ground. Or what about fencing? If you have a sword, they don't train ground techniques with a rapier. This is so stupid.
In our style, we are completely offensive, completely aggressive. We don't wait and watch and try to get them tired. We don't do any of that.
So that is a very interesting moment, because it's a very unique approach from Steven Seagal for Aikido, which he is an instructor of. Since pretty much in all Aikido, you're always the defender. You're taught to never attack. You're taught not to be aggressive. And here's Steven Seagal, a legit master of Aikido. He's teaching Aikido in an aggressive way, which is very different from the regular way Aikido is taught.
Okay, the regular way Aikido is taught, the way that Aikido is, how Aikido is, blah, 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 blah. Look, if he's seeing Steven Seagal do it differently, then he's already proving himself wrong. And you can see it because he's, well, pretty much, and maybe sort of, because I think he knows he's being intellectually dishonest. But aside from Steven Seagal talking about it, we do that in Yoshokai Aikido. My upcoming test, I have four techniques where I'm attacking first as shite, not as uke. So there's that.
You know, this stuff that you really do, it's so dangerous. How many times can you rip someone's throat out in a practice? We don't rip out your throat. We don't rip out your eyes. Just as in karate, we don't blow out your skull. You stop before.
So I can see both pros and cons here. First of all, it's true that you cannot really train all the techniques like eye gouging or kicking in the groin, which are effective techniques, but you can't train them full force with someone and you can't gouge eyes every time. At the same time, I think what Steven Seagal is referring to, you can practice the movement itself. You know, you're doing it at least until that certain moment. You get it into your psyche and physical movement that it is possible, that it's an option. But then the problem that you're not fully training it is really tough as well, because you're not having a resisting partner, you're not having a full-on experience. And then there is a chance that if somebody will attack you, you will have been used to doing this stuff without a resisting partner, and those movements simply can just not come up because your system is used to a different environment when you're doing it, or it freaks out and it doesn't know what to do when the action goes really live.
So stupid. He's trying to make the argument that eye gouging or like trying to rip out somebody's throat or, breaking their brainstem by hitting them in the back of the neck, which, I mean, I don't know, seems a little suspicious to me. I just think that the idea of like sticking my finger in somebody's eye is gross. But I mean, if I'm in a fight for my life, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be clawing and tearing and doing all kinds of things. Any of us would. The idea that we're all going to go into some kind of a street fight where we're just going to have sound mind and judgment and we're not going to be freaking out and adrenaline pumping, and I mean, that's just false. But the idea that it's not a legitimate technique unless you like actively poke somebody's eyes out or tear their throat out or crush their skull or break their brain stem, this is just ridiculous. This is completely ridiculous.
How about in the eyes of the law?
Well, that's a good question from Jesse, but there is an answer to that. I'm just curious now what Steven Seagal is going to answer.
I don't care
No.
about the law. If I have to fight, I don't care about the law. I care about ending it quick.
So that's an abrupt way of looking at it, and I think more thought could be given to that. For example, there's the consideration of striking with an open hand, which can still cause a lot of damage and even knock people out. But on camera and on the eyes of witnesses, it doesn't look like you're the aggressor if you're slapping versus if you're striking. But
if you are on camera and you are actively slapping somebody in the face, you're going to get charged with assault and battery, especially if you attack first. It does not matter if you're using fists or open palms. If the person that you do this to has enough money and they hire an attorney that can find some expert to say that hitting with this side of the hand is far more dangerous than with knuckles, which seems like a silly argument, but if you can get them to convince a jury of that, guess what? You're going to go to jail for a really long time. So do not listen to that advice. He is completely full of shit. This is the worst. This is the worst advice. You know what's really good advice in a situation when you're in a street or in public or somewhere and you need to get you're afraid someone's going to fight you, and you don't know what to do. If you should punch them or if you should slap them, you should just run away. Just run away. Get away. If there are witnesses around you and you're worried about what they're thinking about what you're doing and they're filming you with cameras, ask them for help. Ask them to call the police. Go into the crowd with them. If that person continues to try to attack you, there's so many things that you can do in that situation that don't involve going, I should use my fists or I should use my hands. I'll slap him and then I won't go to jail. So stupid. Okay, so let's take the last little bit that he said and consider that. For those situations where you are by yourself and you're stuck in maybe a room or a hallway or something, you can't get away, or you're in an alleyway. I almost got mugged in an alley in Chicago. And you think that this person is going to attack you and you feel like your life is in danger and so you attack them first, it really doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you do. If you feel like your life is in legitimate danger and you can demonstrate that in a court of law, then it doesn't matter what you do. You're allowed to defend yourself. You don't have to slap somebody as compared to punch them. You could pick up something in the street and hit them. Like, it doesn't matter. If they're really threatening to hurt you and you think that they could kill you, then you can defend yourself. How about that? But better, run away. If you can run away. So here are the 5 rules of self-defense. First, don't be there. Second, if you're there, leave. Third, make a lot of noise. Call a lot of attention to yourself. If you can't leave and you find yourself you're there, make a lot of noise so that people will come over and see what's going on. If there's no people coming over when you're making a lot of noise, rule number 4 is put something between you and the attacker until you can get away. And then rule number 5, if everything else has failed, 1 through 4 has failed, no holds barred. Do whatever you have to do to stop that fight enough so that you can run away. That's the best self-defense advice I have ever received. It has served me well. I usually am never there. And if I find that I'm there, I leave. I've only had to make noise a couple of times. And I never had to put something in between me and somebody else. Because eventually they go, oh, I don't want to get into trouble. He's calling out attention. People that want to attack you on the street, they want to mug you, they want to hurt you, they're cowards. That's why they're doing what they're doing. They don't want trouble. They want an easy score. And so if they think you're going to be difficult, they're going to go and find somebody else.
Now, are all the moves legit? Maybe. But the bigger question is, are they the most optimal moves? Aren't there better options developed by other fighting styles? That's a bigger question for me. And the biggest question is pressure testing. I would want to see these moves in a sparring situation against someone who's really trying to get you and someone who's fighting back. Now, of course, not all of these moves could be practiced, and maybe not all of these moves are designed against a squared up fight, but modifications can be made. The attacker can put on armor. You can choose roles. You can remove the most dangerous movements and still practice most of them. And that's what I would like to see, making sure that these moves work a lot of times against someone who's really going for it.
Okay, lastly, the whole pressure test thing, like it's got to be pressure tested. We got to get, there are ways to modify these techniques. Did you catch that? You could wear armor. You could do all these other things to make these techniques safer to study so that you can study them if they're so dangerous. That's what break falls are for. That's why we do break falls. Most of the techniques that you see in Aikido, if you're not an Aikido person, that look like throws, they're not throws. They're wrist manipulations or shoulder manipulations or elbow manipulations that if you were to just do them, you would just break those joints. Now, you can do them with enough force that you make someone move in a direction and it can look like a throw, but really they don't know how to fall down, and you were to do like a reverse hand to somebody and really rip them over. I mean, they might flip over, but more often than not, they're probably going to have a broken wrist and they're going to crumple to the ground or stumble to the ground. You know, like that's what those techniques were designed to do in the first place. And then we modified them so that you could train in them much more safely. Is there a point which you can modify them so much and make them so safe that that it's not super effective? Like if you were to try and approach it in a really flowy way on the street, probably not super effective. I mean, there's always that person. There's always that exception to the rule where there's a person that's just really, really great. I remember watching a video, I can't find it anymore. It bums me out. It was this video of a Russian wrestling coach. And this guy was like 70 years old, maybe 65, 70 years old. And he was trying to show different wrestling techniques to these 20-year-old guys who were just jacked. They're huge dudes. And he would end up like riding them around as they try and shoot, you know, for a double leg or a single leg. He'd somehow get on them and ride them around and then do something to get a point or just to evade them or whatever. I mean, he was the most spry old man I've ever seen. He's an exception to the rule. He's also highly, highly skilled and highly trained, and there was no forceful grabbing or whatever. He used the opponent's energy against them, and he was really, really good at it. So I don't know what to say. These arguments that he makes are so bad that I have a hard time refuting them because it seems so obvious, if that makes sense. Like I have a really hard time coming up with examples for why they're so bad because they're so bad. You know, it's like someone saying the sky is green. And then you look up and you see the sky is blue and you're like, but the sky is blue. That's what I want to say. Like he says, this is the way all Aikido is. No, it's not. It's not the way all Aikido is. He even says that, oh, look, Steven Seagal's doing Aikido differently. Right before that, he says, this is the way all Aikido is. But then look, Steven Seagal's doing it differently. Yep, because not all Aikido is the same. Which is why you shouldn't be speaking for Aikido on behalf of Aikido, being a representative of all of Aikido. Like, think about the ego. All right, thank you very much. There will be a second video, because there is a second video where he talks about some more stuff. Then I'm going to offer another rebuttal. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if there's somebody else that you want me to take a look at. And there was someone who commented on the last video that I should just challenge Rokas to a sparring match instead of asking him to debate. I have challenged him to a sparring match and a debate. Debate first or second, I don't really care. And he won't take me up on it. So